Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. Thank you for your attention while this important legal information is reviewed. What you hear should not replace consultation with an attorney and should not be considered advice for your situation. On behalf of the Pilot Lawyer and your entire crew, it's our pleasure to have you aboard.
Welcome, aviators, to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast with us, the Eisen brothers at the Eisen Law Firm, where aviation law is all we do, nothing else. You're here for what we do best, navigating the FAA medical certification process for pilots and those who want to become pilots. Around the office, we say if you don't laugh, you cry. And for the next 30 minutes, we hope to bring you the lighter side of what can otherwise be a frustrating process. So whether you're laughing at us or with us, join us brothers as we discuss the fascinating world of FAA medical certification. What's going on today?
Hey. Less and less.
We're not talking about your waist size. He's
talking about my hairline.
You can't make a hairline joke about yourself.
I just did.
Wish you were a hair.
Maybe we should do a podcast on alopecia.
Keep those words out of your mouth.
That's just beautiful, you know? So anyhow, today we're going to discuss FAA medical certification with past anxiety. How does that drive you?
Quivering in my boots.
It's a subject near and dear to my heart.
Every morning I wake up with, and you can quote me, I'm an anxious person.
I don't need to quote you. I know it firsthand.
Yeah. Well, so what's the deal? Can you get a medical with anxiety or not?
Oh, you can do it. With a determination and enough money, you can do just about anything.
Just about anything. Well, let's take an example. Someone's got applying for a medical 5 years ago. They were treated with Prozac for, or whatever you're taking, being treated for anxiety. What's the deal? You going to get a medical now? You're not taking the medication anymore.
Yeah, but you're going to have to disclose that you were previously diagnosed with anxiety. Question 18M on the medical application
But I
asks.
don't have it anymore. I'm not.
Doesn't
suffering.
matter because the question asks, have you ever in your life had, presently have, or been diagnosed with? So even if your doctor didn't diagnose you, let's say you just like going and talking to a shrink just because you like the way it makes you feel. And they don't really think you have a problem. But yet somehow they, for insurance purposes or whatever other reason that they need to justify their existence, they diagnose you with anxiety or some type of unspecified anxiety. Well, there's a diagnosis. Or let's say that you don't get a diagnosis, but you went to them thinking that you had anxiety, and that was a whole impetus for why you went. Then potentially you would have to answer question 18M in the affirmative, that yes, you have a history of anxiety.
This is riveting. That's why I dozed off. So let me say this much. So you're saying if I was treated with medication 5 years ago, stopped it 4 years ago, I've been off the medication for 4 years, applying for a medical certificate, and get down to the medical application, 18M, what do I say? Let me back up, though. I was treated with generalized anxiety disorder. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder in order to get that medication when I was going through whatever issue I was going through.
Well, if you're no longer currently using the medication, you wouldn't have to put question 17A, currently using any medication, if you haven't used it in 4 years.
Well, let me be clear, though. If I'm not using it, but I'm still being prescribed the medication, I'd still have to report it.
All right.
I shouldn't be still prescribed it, though, if I'm not using it.
Then that's the whole thing that we would have to delve into in the representation of this individual. Beyond that, though, you would have to put down yes to 18M, that you have a history of generalized anxiety disorder.
So I do that. What's going to happen?
Well, your AME is going to defer your application.
Is it always going to be deferred? I mean, I guess sometimes I could get a letter from my doctor and I could spool it up for my AME to consider, but most of the time it's going to get deferred. Is that?
That's my understanding. I believe that's your understanding as well.
That's my understanding, but
I've noticed a role reversal here. Anthony's now doing the questioning and Christopher's doing the answering of the questions.
Every so often,
odd.
the co-pilot has to take the
We had
yoke.
a lot of complaints. They wanted you gone, and they wanted it to be you gone, and they wanted it to be a solo show with just Alex, actually. Take that back. They wanted Alex to solo show. pilot lawyer with Alex.
They thought you were a woman.
Well, this day and age.
Anywho, going back to the question du jour, what was it?
Yeah, so is it going to get deferred, and what's that mean?
Yeah, if it's going to get deferred. Essentially, Amy's going to say, listen, I can't issue this. You're going to have to take it up with Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City is going to send you an informational letter.
That's beautiful. What's in that letter?
And they're going to ask for your history of treatment records, anything related to the generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis, any of the treatment records related to that, maybe prescription history. Also likely going to ask for a psychiatric evaluation by a HIMSS-trained psychiatrist.
Let me ask you this, though. They may not jump right into that. They may say, give us your treatment records, and then they might say, give us a detailed clinical progress note from your treating physician.
That might be a setup.
It is a setup, I would imagine, because here's the problem. You go to your doctor, you get all the records, and you just nonchalantly send those records out. But did you look at the records? Did you look at them?
Yeah, well, here's what's going to happen. If you didn't look at them, I guarantee you the FAA is going to look at them.
If I don't look at them, I don't know what's in them. What if my doctor was saying, hey, buddy, you have generalized anxiety disorder, but they were also putting in your records that we think you have major depressive disorder, attention deficit disorder, panic attacks. Is that going to be a problem if I send my records out there to the FAA and with that in there and I don't do anything to try to...
I can answer that one. Yes.
Listen, this isn't Sesame Street. It's not the more the merrier, okay? The more problems you have, the more issues it's going to be. So obviously, you're going to have to atone for all these diagnoses that you have and show why they're not aeromedically significant to the extent you're able to do that.
So let's say I have just generalized anxiety disorder and the FAA wants my treatment records and a letter from my doctor. I haven't seen a doctor for anxiety for several years, hypothetically. Let me back up. Let's say I can get a letter and it says, I'm doing fine, not being treated. So I send that into the FAA. What are they going to do?
They're probably going to say, thank you very much, but we're still unable to establish your eligibility to hold a medical certificate. We need you to go see a HIMSS-trained psychiatrist.
And why would that be? Is it the risk for recurrent symptoms they're concerned about, or what's the problem here?
Yeah, I would say so. Wouldn't you?
I don't know. What do our viewers think?
The viewers think they should have a medical long ago. There's nothing wrong with it.
I've been waiting here to get my medical for 15 months.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, this is a back and forth process that's going to take some time. Is there
a way to buck the system to where I don't have to wait 15 months and I lose my job?
I can answer that one. No.
Well, I wouldn't say that there's a way to buck the system per se.
I don't think you can answer that. I think that's an incorrect statement.
Think you haven't been paying attention.
Okay.
What do you do here?
Make it 10 months. How's that?
Well, I think what you would do is that if you go to somebody who has experience in these types of matters, they understand the process and the protocols and what the FAA is looking for, so that you might be able to go in there instead of half-cocked. You might be able to go in there.
Do you think that language is a little bit
No, it's
strong?
it's not. It's not. It's an entirely historical factoid I can provide to substantiate that.
1652.
Yeah.
General Cock.
No, it's about
flintlock guns.
Yeah, there you go. The guy gets it.
Come on.
So now he's providing help.
There
But
you
point
go.
is, you could go in there and you can maybe have all of your ducks in a row. Is that more palatable?
For this viewership?
You didn't say fully cocked. Come on.
Have all your ducks in a row, so that way when you submit the information to the FAA, you're more likely to have a streamlined process to cut down on that back and forth, ping pong, back and forth,
Here's
back
my
and forth.
dream situation.
You have a dream?
A dream situation. If I've had a history of anxiety and I have...
Is this a reality?
No, it's not a reality. If I had a diagnosis of anxiety, I went and got my records, and it just showed generalized anxiety disorder, used medication for about a year, 2 years, and then I got those records, and that's all it said. And then I could review those records before I submit my medical application. Potentially, if I really just wanted to streamline everything beautifully, I could get a psychiatric evaluation with somebody that's trustworthy, a HIMSS-trained psychiatrist. I could package all that up, submit that with my application, and I believe that the application would go through much faster because the FAA has what they need to support eligibility in that submission. A less optimal situation would be I go and get my records and it identifies panic attacks or major depressive disorder or some other issue that inclines the FAA toward a risk for recurrent symptoms. A risk for recurrent symptoms would be something along the idea of, recurrent panic attacks, suicidal ideation, psychiatric hospitalizations, stuttering use of medication. For example, I start the medication, I come off the medication, I start with symptoms again, I have to start the medication. That would suggest a risk for recurrent symptoms. And in doing so, I would definitely want to get the psychiatric evaluation, if not also implement something to help mitigate the risk for recurrent symptoms, whether it be engagement with some level of therapy or something that I can also shove into the FAA's cage to say, hey, listen, this risk for recurrent symptoms, if there is such a thing, is mitigated. Isn't that a beautiful thought process?
It's well thought out, coherent, logical. Anywho, what's the deal with HIMSS psychiatrists? What are they? We've been throwing that term around, maybe for the less informed out there. How are they
talking
any
about
different?
you, Alex.
Hi.
Less informed? HIMSS psychiatrist is essentially a psychiatrist that has been trained in the HIMSS program.
It's a circular definition. Well, what is the HIMSS program?
So the HIMSS program is essentially, I'm sure I'm not presenting it the way the FAA would want it presented, but essentially is a program that the FAA is in sponsorship of, which facilitates training for aviation medical examiners, psychiatrists, and psychologists, I suppose other interested parties, in substance-related issues, as well as sort of the FAA's understanding of mental health-related issues.
Has your FAA medical certificate been denied? Are you concerned you may not be able to get a medical certificate from the FAA? Are you at risk for FAA action for failing to report your medical history appropriately? Call the pilot lawyer at 1-855-FAA-1215 to discuss your options for getting the FAA to issue your medical certificate and get you flying. We are happy to evaluate your case and discuss with you a plan for presenting your case to the AME or the FAA. Aviation law is all we do, nothing else.
So a lot of times I think we hear HIMSS program in our profession and in the aviation industry, and you think, oh, that guy's got some kind of alcohol problem or some kind of drug use problem, and he's in the HIMSS program. And so when we're talking about going to a HIMSS trained psychiatrist, even though we're not talking about a substance dependence or alcohol use, or drug use, or any kind of abuse in that regard, it's solely with respect to the fact that these individuals have training in mental health arts.
Mental health arts. That's correct.
Yeah.
Beyond that, though, they have not just the mental health, but they have that aviation perspective. So it seems to be a rather small knit community, such that these psychiatrists that are HIMSS trained, the FAA seems to recognize and understand that they have an appreciation for what the FAA is expecting with respect to the aviation regulations, the FAA's policies, and essentially this risk for recurrent symptoms. For example, that letter that you get from your treating physician may say, hey, Jim Bob's doing just fine. He hasn't had medication in a long time. Sincerely, Dr.
Yodel.
Dr. Yodel. Dr. Yodel. But it doesn't embrace the fact that your treatment record suggests maybe a passive suicidal ideation or panic attacks or recurrent symptoms, whereas the psychiatric evaluation with a HIMSS psychiatrist would potentially embrace this idea of what those details may factor into with respect to the risk for aviation safety. There is sort of a stick. Let's just go ahead, and if the folks at the FAA are listening,
More power to you.
glad you're here.
You'll learn something.
Those are not the words of the pilot lawyer. No, but I think there's this thought process of, well, hey, listen, we didn't tell you to go get a psychiatric evaluation. You're opening the door that we didn't ask to be opened. Come on, man.
I'm sure they sound like that too.
Yeah. But the problem there is that we know you're going to ask for it. So why make the airmen submit the records, submit the treating physician letter, wait the 4 to 6 months for that process through, all for you to come back and ask for the psychiatric evaluation, which doing so, submitting it with the application up front could save the airman several months if it's favorable. Now, I understand the idea of it not being favorable, and the FAA saying, well, we didn't ask for this. This is opening us all sorts of cans of worms that we wouldn't have otherwise asked about. I think that's why it's important that...
Which makes no sense, really. I mean, what? So suddenly the agency tasked with keeping the skies safe is no longer concerned about keeping the skies safe. I mean, there's potentially something lurking in this individual's history that would have caused them concern, but because they didn't ask for it, they don't need to know about it. Stick your head in the sand and just turn a blind eye.
That's very existential.
Yeah, well,
but relatable.
I believe you probably brought that little fact pattern up because you've experienced that.
I've experienced that discussion, and you got to be careful. Just like everything else, you're fishing for frogs in the middle of the night down on the bayou. You got to be careful.
You look like a guy that's fishing for frogs.
Oh yeah, baby.
No, I don't think you fish for frogs.
Well, you're going to be fishing for frogs if we're with the wrong psychiatrist. I mean, so a psychiatric evaluation is something that could pump out, they could be looking at, hey, yeah, you got this anxiety disorder, but hey, Sonny, tell me how much you drink. Oh, I drink a 12-pack every night. Oh, next thing you have a substance dependence diagnosis. So you got to be careful. And that's why we always recommend running these things through someone such as ourselves, pilot lawyer, TM, to try to help facilitate those evaluations and know what you're getting into and know that those referrals, the psychiatric evaluation, are going to benefit you rather than not benefit you.
Are you saying that there's some psychiatrists that you may want to choose who you see or avoid because of how it might get misconstrued?
I've caught frogs that I didn't wish I'd caught. Let me put it that way. I've caught some bad frogs. More like toads, am I right?
Bofos.
Anyhow.
Well, in those situations, I mean, let's say that you get, because, everybody, I like to always refer to cases as snowflakes. Every snowflake has its own unique pattern. Sure, it may be snow, it may be cold, it may have the appearance of a snowflake, but as they say, each snowflake has its individual pattern, right? So every case is going to have its own unique pattern to a certain extent, even though it may be snow.
No two snowflakes are the same.
Well, still, okay. So then my point stands.
Sure. But if you're going to stammer around this seemingly obvious phrase that people say all the time, how can they trust you with respect to their...
How long have you been doing this? Don't you know that you have to beat a dead horse before the idea is imbued?
Oh, what did she say?
Anyhow, let me say this. So perhaps somebody comes to you and they have a history of generalized anxiety disorder, and you think, okay, this might not be too bad. This is probably doable. It seems easy enough at the outset. Send them out for an evaluation to a trusted psychiatrist, and the report comes back less than glowing.
What does trusted mean? Does that mean they're making stuff up? Or
no, it's somebody who has legitimate credentials, somebody who has been proven, somebody who's been trusted by the FAA on a number of occasions.
They're looking at the records, aren't they?
Yeah, looking at the records. Somebody that's thorough. I mean, not just somebody trusted in the sense of, hey, look, we're going to send you over here and it's going to be, all taken care of. Vinny in a bag of donuts type stuff.
You've had more than a fair share of donuts.
He's looking at you. Point is, though, let's say the report comes back and it's not everything you'd hoped it would be and more. But it's obvious that this individual is going to have a little bit of difficulty or hurdles to jump through. What do you do then?
So at that point, we're going to take that psychiatric evaluation. No, we're not going to ball it up. But what we're going to do is figure out what can we do to alleviate the concerns that the psychiatrist has. Because if this psychiatrist has a problem, what on God's earth makes you think the FAA is not going to have a problem? So the idea is that we need to figure out, what is the psychiatrist recommending? Is it therapy? Is it re-engagement with medication? Is it, what is it? And we want to try to explore that field before we present it to the FAA so that we can present that documentation so as to say, Dr. X says that this airman needs, therapy. We get some therapy engagement. We submit that with the package to the FAA. So that will save the airman potentially 6 months in review for the FAA to just come back and say the same thing.
So the idea here is that while generally doable, you want to make sure that all of your exits are covered. And essentially, any kind of fallout that you might foresee is kind of hedged.
You know what? That is absolutely and beautifully synthesized. But let me ask you this. Why on God's earth would we be involved? Alex, I'm going to let you take it away. Why would you you're a doctor, right? Right. That's what the certificate on the wall says. And my mommy and daddy's money has paid well dollars to earn you that degree. Why on earth would you have an attorney such as us, Pilot Lawyer TM? Why would you have us involved in a process like this? Is a medical process.
Would you?
Isn't it?
What was that? If it weren't for a regulation saying that you had to go get an exam by a doctor to fly your airplane, would you just be going, "Hey, doctor, examine me"? Unless you're into that kind of thing.
Maybe he's been paying attention.
Yeah, he's worth every penny.
Yeah.
Hey.
Your mom and daddy did well.
My mom and daddy's money spent well. That being said, the question then becomes, so it's a regulatory process. And the idea of having a doctor guide you through this process is fine. Sure, they understand the medical piece to some extent, but we consider the medical piece the evidence to support eligibility to hold a medical under the regulatory criteria that is outlined in Part 67 of the Federal Aviation Regulations.
Yeah, everything you're doing during this time, everything you're submitting to the FAA is going into an airman medical file. If you're ultimately denied by the FAA, you'll have the opportunity to petition the National Transportation Safety Board for review of that denial. Therein, you will have the burden of proof to show that the FAA erroneously denied you for generalized anxiety disorder. And exhibit number 1, or A, or whatever your methodology of quantifying an exhibit is going to be the airman medical file and everything you've put into it. So you need to make sure that what you're putting into the airman medical file is quality evidence supportive of your position, as opposed to evidence that's going to just be one more hurdle for you to
Can a doctor do that?
Yeah,
I don't
but
know how to go in front of a judge.
Well, there you have it from a doctor, ladies and gentlemen.
So you're trying to
Why,
say
hello,
that,
judgy wudgy.
Here's the thing. If I'm an attorney at the point where this guy's been denied out the yin-yang, or this lady's been denied out the yin-yang, wouldn't I have liked to have been able to control the evidence going into the process before once I'm at a trial point? Or wouldn't I mean, for example, if you're arrested, do you wait until you get to the trial to have an attorney involved? No. You bring the attorney in right away.
I mean, some people ask for the attorney while they're being questioned by the police.
Well, there you have it.
How is it any different than this?
I don't understand this doctor to doctor
FAA is the
thing.
police.
I mean, I'm sure the FAA would love it to be doctor to doctor, but it's not as though we're going in there like a bull in a china shop saying, "Hey, listen, you numbskulls, this person should be given a medical certificate." It's more so, here's what you need to see. Here's what supports the eligibility. We're trying to help facilitate that idea. And so if you have anxiety, don't let this give you worse anxiety. Am I right? But the idea is that there are things that can be done up front to help present your submission early on through an attorney, whether it's us or somebody else, to help support your eligibility.
Well, it looks like we're coming in for a landing here. Anthony, do you want to take us in on final?
You don't know anything.
Says the non-pilot.
Yeah.
That was accurate, though.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Did he say non-final?
No, take us in on final.
All right, fine. We'll let it stand.
We'll let that one slide. But the final approach for you today is that if you've had past anxiety, you can still get a medical certificate. There are some details as to what's in your records, what you want to do as far as evaluations are concerned, and who you want to consult to establish a sufficient package to support your eligibility with the FAA. If you have any questions, give us a call. Well, you've logged another uneventful half hour listening to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. And even though our wives deny they know us in public, we are the Eisen brothers of the Eisen Law Firm. We'll see you next time.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.